July 1969. What do you remember about July 1969? I mean, I was actually pretty far from being born myself, but if you're a history buff, you're probably thinking moon landing, right? Apollo 11, one small step for man, and all of that. But if you lived in Fort Worth, Texas that summer, you weren't thinking about the moon really. You were thinking about what was lurking in the woods at Lake Worth. Because on July 10th, 1969, 10 days before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, John Reichart was sitting by the lake trying to catch some catfish while his wife Linda read a book in the parked car. Normal Texas summer evening. And then Linda started screaming. John looks up and sees something massive on the top of their car. White fur, and it's trying to get through the windows at his wife. He runs over, shoves this thing away from the car, gets a good look at it in the process. He claims 7 feet tall, standing on 2 legs, horns on its head, and covered in white hair and what looked like fish scales. John would later tell the police it was half man, half goat. They peeled out of there so fast that they actually left skid marks on the ground. And when they got home and looked at the car, there was an 18-inch scratch down the side. It was deep, like claws. And the Fort Worth Police Department took them seriously because John wasn't alone. 5 other people saw the whole thing happen. And the next morning, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram's front page headline, it read, "Fishy Man Goat Terrifies Couple Parked at Lake Worth." And that's how Fort Worth's Summer of the Monster actually began. As someone from North Texas and DFW, specifically, I grew up hearing this. This was one of the first cryptid stories I actually ever heard in my life. Maybe even before Bigfoot, I can't remember, but I know it got me fascinated with weird stuff. And so I'm really excited to dig into this one. It's gonna be a fun one. So if you're from DFW, around Dallas, you'll probably know of it. So let's get into it. All right, so let me give some context here. Lake Worth is a reservoir on the west fork of the Trinity River. It's about 10 miles northwest of Fort Worth. It was created in about 1910 as a water supply for the city. It's a pretty lake, lots of trees, definitely the kind of place teenagers would hang out in the summertime. And right in the middle of the lake is this piece of land called Greer Island. Now, it's not technically an island, it's more of like a peninsula that you could reach by car off of this very muddy dirt road. But everyone called it Greer Island. And in 1969, it was the spot for being a teenager in Fort Worth. You know, the kind of place where you'd park your car and hang out with friends, maybe drink some beer you weren't actually supposed to have. It's isolated enough to feel private, but close enough to town that you could get there easily. So essentially a perfect hangout spot. But here's what's really interesting. So Lake Worth already had a monster history, setting us up for a bit of a boy who cried wolf action. In 1947, 22 years before our story, there were reports of a sea serpent in Lake Worth, and this one was definitely a prank. Workers at a local boat works rigged up an inner tube with pulleys on a trot line to make it bob up and down in the water like some kind of lake creature. And the crazy thing is, the prank worked. People freaked out. The excitement went on for days. According to Fort Worth Star-Telegram columnist George Dolan, who wrote about it in December of 1968, he said, "The prank worked. People freaked out. The excitement went on for days," Dolan wrote, before someone finally revealed the joke. But here's Dolan's punchline, and this is pretty important. Quote, "Some of them think that the monster is still in Lake Worth," end quote. He wrote that in December of 1968. This is 6 months before everything started to happen. So when the Goatman showed up in July 1969, Lake Worth had already had this weird reputation as a place where people saw things, real or imagined, or pranked. Now the summer of 1969 was wild all over America. Woodstock was about to happen in August, the moon landing was coming, and the Vietnam War protests were everywhere. It was this moment of massive cultural change in Fort Worth. Fort Worth was about to get its own headline. Okay, so back to John and Linda Reichart. They report their encounter to the Fort Worth police around midnight on July 10th. The police take it serious because, and I can't stress this enough, These people were genuinely terrified. The officer who interviewed them, James S. McGee, later told reporter Jim Mars, "We did make a serious investigation because those people were really scared." And it wasn't just the Reicharts. There were two other couples parked nearby who saw the whole thing. 6 witnesses in total, all describing the same creature. Massive, bipedal, white fur, scales, horns. So the police, they go out to Greer Island to investigate. And, of course, they don't really find anything. No creature, no tracks, no evidence. But they also can't explain away that 18-inch scratch mark on John's car. The next day, July 10th, the Star-Telegram runs the story on the front page. Fishy man, goat, terrifies couples parked at Lake Worth. And that's when things got really crazy.
Just about the time man, in all his wisdom, decides that he has this world and everything in it all figured out, along comes something he can't explain. Take the recent reports of the Lake Worth monster, or creature, or whatever you want to call it. Some who have seen it say it looks like a half man, half goat. Others, who are a little more conservative, describe it a little differently.
So that night, July 11th, people start showing up at Lake Worth, dozens of them, maybe even like hundreds. Everyone wants to see this Goatman monster.
The skeptical say it's a man in a monkey suit, but some say it can't be, that no man is that big or that strong or could make so hideous a sound. At any rate, something happened out here last night, and so tonight there will be more people back, armed with cameras and probably with rifles. And this causes apprehension, particularly for police who say that, monster or no, if there are very many rifles here, somebody might get hurt. Jerry Taff, Channel 8 News, at Lake Worth.
And apparently the monster was happy to oblige, because in front of approximately 40 witnesses, something did appear on a bluff near Greer Island.
Well, it was about 7 foot tall, weighed about 350 pounds. And it was hairy, and I couldn't see his face. It was in the dark.
There's a report that it has scales, too. Did you notice that?
I was so scared I didn't see nothing like that. And he threw a tar some 400 to 500 feet. Police that looked at the tar in the back of the car said that it had to come off from a pickup. They'd thrown it at everybody, about 40 people.
Jim Mars, the Star-Telegram reporter covering this, is out there trying to interview witnesses. And they're describing this thing as definitely 7 feet tall, whiter gray fur, and definitely not human. Definitely not a normal animal.
It was up there on those cliffs, and it'd stay up there running back and forth. And it wouldn't run the whole distance around. It just run halfway around it and halfway back, and it wouldn't run through the trail that was up there. It'd run through the edge of the cliff that was pretty rugged and had a lot of weeds and trees around it, and I couldn't see how no human could really get through there as fast as it could.
The Fort Worth police are now genuinely worried, not really about the monster, but about the armed civilians kind of forming these hunting parties of whatever it actually is. But here's what happens next. So hundreds of amateur trackers descended on the area with all manner of, Remingtons, Brownings, Colt firearms. Multiple newspaper accounts from July of 1969 said that the police are worried that someone's going to get shot. They start patrolling the area just to keep people from actually killing each other. The local newspapers are eating it up. Every single day there's a new story, a new sighting, new witnesses. The Lake Worth monster becomes the talk of Fort Worth. And this woman named Sallie Ann Clarke shows up. Sallie Ann Clarke was an aspiring writer and private investigator from Binbrook. When she hears about the monster sightings, she drops everything and starts interviewing witnesses. She's going out to Lake Worth at night, talking to people who claim to have seen it, collecting stories. And in September 1969, just 2 months after it all started, she publishes a book. That book is called The Lake Worth Monster of Greer Island, Fort Worth, Texas. Sallie Ann Clarke, she self-published this, and it was quickly written. She did indeed collect eyewitness accounts and her own experiences. She later admitted that the book was semi-fiction because of it, part journalism, part creative writing, but it became the document on the Lake Worth monster. And Clarke, she became the unofficial historian of the whole event. So now, throughout July and August, sightings keep happening. People report seeing the creature running through the tall grass near the lake. Someone did find tracks too big for a man, and a few weeks later, ranchers near the lake find mutilated sheep on their property. The police, well, they keep investigating. They're skeptical, but they can't explain everything away right away. And then school started in September, and just like that, the sightings, They completely stopped. Completely. So, all right. So before we get into why the sighting stopped, let me tell you about the photo, because there is exactly one photograph of the Lake Worth monster. And, it's become kind of iconic in the cryptozoology circles. November 19th, 1969, around 1:35 in the morning, a Fort Worth man named Alan Plaster is driving past the Fort Worth Nature Center near Greer Island with his Polaroid camera. He's just out for a drive, basically. And he sees something, large white shape in the tall grass, rising up from the vegetation. Plaster grabs his Polaroid, snaps one shot, and the thing disappears into the darkness. And so you're probably wondering, what does the photo actually show? Well, it is grainy, it's dark, and it's a Polaroid from 1969, but you can see a man-sized shape, kind of fuzzy, kind of blob-like, with what appears to be dark eyes. People have described it as looking like a giant white furball or, a big white labradoodle. But the photo got out anyways. It circulated in newspapers. It ended up in cryptozoology websites and museums. And it became the single most famous piece of evidence for the Lake Worth monster. And now here's what we have for physical evidence besides the photo. So we have the 18-inch scratch on John Reichart's car. The police confirmed that this did exist. It was deep, like something with claws did indeed make it. The tire that was thrown on July 11th, multiple witnesses saw this happen. An actual physical tire went flying through the air, and that's not disputed by anybody. Tracks near the lake that people claimed were too large for a human. These were reported but not well documented, so I couldn't find anything about them really outside of just that. The mutilated sheep found on nearby ranches in late July. Ranchers reported this to the police, though there's a debate whether this could be related, to the monster or just normal predatory activity in the wild. There were consistent descriptions across multiple witnesses who didn't know each other. 7 feet tall, wider gray fur, scales, which is kind of weird for a mammal, horns, bipedal, smelled very bad. That's it. That's the evidence pile. No body, no clear photographs besides Plaster's kind of blob. No captured creature, just witness testimony and some physical traces and one grainy Polaroid. But here's what I think is very interesting. For about 3 months in 1969, something was happening at Lake Worth. Whether it was a real creature, pranks, mass hysteria, or some combination, people were experiencing something. And I grew up in the 90s and I heard about the Goatman all the way until then. But in the 60s, it stopped right when school started, which brings us to the skeptical viewpoint. So let's get into it, because there is a pattern here that is pretty suspicious, right? I mean, monster sightings all summer long, dozens of witnesses, front page news, and then September comes, school starts, and nothing. Like just complete silence. If you were a Fort Worth police detective in 69, you'd probably be thinking, to yourself, wonder what all those high school students were doing now that they were back in class, And you'd be right to be suspicious, because starting in the 2000s, there were some people who started to confess. In 2005, a reporter at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram received an anonymous handwritten letter. No name, no return address, but the letter claimed to be from one of the 3 high school student classmates who, in the summer of 69, and I quote, decided to go out to Lake Worth and scare people, end quote, using a tinfoil mask and costumes. Now, the writer didn't prove or provide any details about which specific sightings they were responsible for. They didn't name the other 2 students and never, came forward publicly. Then in 2009, Fort Worth, Texas Magazine published an article where they interviewed a man, identified only as Vinzen's. He admitted he was involved in the famous tire throwing incident from July 11th. His explanation? He and his friends were rolling a tire down a hill as a prank, and it hit a bump. It went airborne and landed way closer to the crowd than they expected. They claim it's probably about 500 feet. They never meant for it to go that far. Vinzen's still lives near the lake, apparently, but has no interest in naming names or publicly taking credit. He just wanted to set the record straight on that one incident. Then there's Alan Plaster himself. In 2006, when his 1969 photo started appearing on cryptozoology websites and in a San Antonio museum exhibit, Plaster gave an interview to the Star-Telegram. He said, "The idea of a real monster is silly." And to quote him, quote, "Looking back, I realized when we drove by, it stood up. Whatever it was, it wanted to be seen. That was a prank. that was somebody out there waiting for people to drive by. I don't think an animal would have acted that way. End quote. Plaster refused further interviews after that. When reporters tried to reach out to him in 2009 for a follow-up, he declined to talk. There's also this. The director of the Fort Worth Nature Center reportedly caught a group of high school students in the act during summer of 1969, jumping around on a hill, making noises, rolling things down towards onlookers. And there's multiple sources for this, including a Dallas Morning News retrospective. The kids, they were using the simple but effective method of, stand on a cliff where people can see you in silhouette, make some weird noises, throw stuff down, then disappear into the woods. Oh, and then there's one more possible explanation that's kind of wild. A kennel owner near Lake Worth came forward and said he lost a monkey that summer. It's one of those medium-sized primates from Asia that some people keep as exotic pets. So could a loose monkey explain some of the sightings? Maybe. I don't know. Those monkeys can be aggressive. They are bipedal sometimes, and they're strong enough to throw things, but they're only about 2 feet tall, not 7. And they definitely don't have any horns or scales. So, the hoax theory has a lot going for it, but I don't know. So what do you think? On all of that, that's pretty interesting, but is it the case closed? I don't know. There are true believers, and not everybody thinks that the Lake Worth monster was entirely a hoax, and some of the reasons why are pretty compelling. First, Sallie Ann Clarke herself. Remember, she's the one who wrote the book and admitted that it was semi-fiction, but according to her husband Richard, after Clarke published her book, she saw the monster 3 separate times herself. Clarke later told Fort Worth Star-Telegram in 1989, and I quote, "If I'd seen it before I wrote the book would have been quite a lot different. It wouldn't have been semi-fiction. It would have been like history." End quote. Now, by the time of that 2009 interview, Clarke had suffered a series of strokes and couldn't speak much about the entire ordeal anymore. But her husband Richard shared this detail, and I quote, "She offered a $5,000 reward for any person who could pass a polygraph that they were the monster. She never got a call." End quote. So $5,000, that's real money, especially in the 70s and 80s when she made the offer. If it was just high school kids pulling pranks, wouldn't at least one of them want to claim that reward? And nobody ever did. And then there's the physical evidence that doesn't quite fit into the hoax theory. The thing I just can't get out of my mind is that 18-inch scratch on John Reichart's car. It was real. Police confirmed it. So how did pranksters create that? And how did they time it to jump on a specific car at a specific moment? The tire throwing has a confession, sure, but Jack Harris and other witnesses said that they saw a large figure throw it, not just a tire rolling down a hill. Were they all mistaken? Maybe, but that's a lot of people to be wrong about the same detail, right? And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The Reichart's encounter, the original one on July 9th, 10th, involved 6 witnesses. 6 people saw the same thing attack John's car. If it was a prank, it was incredibly well coordinated. Teenagers, they would have had to know which car to target, time the attack perfectly, create a costume convincing enough to fool 6 people up close, leave physical evidence, the scratch, escape without being caught or identified. That seems pretty sophisticated for a spontaneous summer prank. None that we ever pulled came off that good. So let's talk about the cryptozoologist, right? So Craig Woolheater was 9 years old in Fort Worth in 1969 when the Lake Worth monster hit the news. He cut out all the paper articles and kept them in a scrapbook. He was fascinated. And years later, while driving through Louisiana, Woolheater says he saw something in his headlights, a gray-bodied, bipedal creature with ape-like features crossing the road. That experience, combined with his childhood fascination with the Lake Worth monster, led him to be the founder of the Texas Bigfoot Research Center in 1999. His belief, I found this quote, I quote, "I personally think it's an undiscovered, uncatalogued primate species that walks on 2 legs." End quote. He thinks that the Lake Worth monster was real, a Bigfoot-type creature that was passing through the area, maybe because of, a viable habitat around the lake. Now, a lot of people might think, okay, but this is Texas. We don't have Bigfoot in Texas. But actually, Texas leads the nation in Bigfoot sightings. Seriously. I found this from Lyle Blackburn. He's a cryptozoologist and author. And he is a Fort Worth native and probably the most, I don't know, respected cryptozoologist working on Texas cases. He's written books on the Fook monster, the lizard man of Bishopville, and other regional cryptids that we'll get to in future episodes, I'm sure. In 2024, he published what's now considered the definitive book on the subject, the Lake Worth monster, the true story of the Greer Island Goatman. Blackburn spent years doing archival research at Fort Worth Nature Center, the University of North Texas, and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He tracked down primary sources, interviewed witnesses, examined every piece of evidence that he could find. And here's what he found. Reports of white-furred, Bigfoot-like creatures in the Lake Worth area actually dated back to at least 1938, 30 years before the 1969 outbreak. There's also a pattern of Goatman sightings all throughout Texas, including the famous Goatman of Old Alton Bridge in Denton, about 40 miles away. Blackburn's careful to note that most Goatman legends are urban folklore with elaborate origin stories, usually involving tragic deaths or like curses or something supernatural. The Lake Worth monster is different though. It has no origin story. It just happened. It terrorized people for 3 months and then left. And that's more consistent with an actual animal passing through than an urban legend. Blackburn also notes that the Lake Worth monster descriptions don't perfectly match typical Goatman folklore. Yes, there are horns, but witnesses also describe ape-like features, incredible strength, and a musky smell. All things that are more consistent with primate sightings than supernatural Goatmen. So Blackburn's conclusion is nuanced. Some sightings were definitely pranks, the tire throwing probably prank. Some of the later sightings when Monster Mania was in full swing, probably hysteria or copycats. But the original encounters, the Reichart incident, maybe those were real. Maybe they were real sightings of something that we can't fully explain yet. All right, so here we are 55 years later, and the mystery remains unsolved. Rob Dinkhaus has been the manager of Fort Worth Nature Center for the past few years, and he's been working there for 20 years in total. And he says he still regularly gets questions about the Lake Worth monster from people in the Bigfoot and, Sasquatch communities. He's even identified the probable location where Alan Plaster took the famous photo based on the vegetation and terrain visible in the image. Michelle Villafranca is the natural resource specialist at the Nature Center. She's become the go-to collector of all things Lake Worth monster. On her office windowsill, an empty bottle of Sierra Nevada Bigfoot ale. On her bookshelf, Sallie Ann Clarke's book filled right next to field guides on the local mammals. She told a reporter, "We have alligator sighting report forms. We don't have any Goatman sightings forms, and maybe we should start. After all, he is North Central Texas fauna." Love that quote. The Nature Center has embraced the legend. They hold a Lake Worth Monster Bash, every few years, a celebration with canoe rides, guided hikes around Greer Island, live music, food and drinks. Families come out, kids learn about the legend, everyone has a good time. Greer Island itself is now part of the Fort Worth Nature Center refuge, over 3,000 acres of preserved woods and prairie along the lake. And you can visit the site where it all happened, walk the same trails, stand where John Reichart's car was parked that night. And what most cities do when they find out their famous monster might have been teenagers in a gorilla suit? They get embarrassed. They downplay it. They let it fade into forgotten weird history. Well, Fort Worth threw a party. Not just once, they hold, the Monster Bash every few years at the Fort Worth Nature Center. We've got Goatman beer, local artists make sculptures, kids on field trips ask about it. The legend is literally part of the Nature Center's identity at this point. And that tells you something about Texas that goes way beyond whether a cryptid is real or not. We don't do shame about our weird history. We lean in. The Alamo is sacred, rodeos are heritage, and apparently so is a half man, half goat that terrorized teenagers in 1969. Does it matter that we've got confessions from pranksters, that the timing is suspicious, that Alan Plaster thought his own photo was a hoax? Well, to the community of Fort Worth and, most of us Texans, it doesn't really matter. They look at this whole mess, complicated, probably mostly fake story, but we like to say this is ours. This is the North Central Texas fauna. Michelle Villafranca standing in her office surrounded by the Lake Worth monster memorabilia talking about making Goatman sighting report forms. That's like the perfect encapsulation of how Fort Worth treats this legend. I mean, with affection, with pride, with a sense of humor, but also with genuine respect for what it means to be like the community. Because here's the thing, even the Lake Worth monster, if it was entirely a hoax, which we can't definitely say if it was or wasn't, it still became something real. It became community identity. It became local folklore. It became a reason for families to visit the nature center and learn about Texas wildlife and wilderness. So, hoax or not, it gave Fort Worth something that matters. A very fun story that's uniquely theirs. And that's the most Texas thing about the whole legend. So, was there really a 7-foot Goatman prowling Greer Island in the summer of 1969? I mean, I don't know, but neither does anyone else. So, what do you think? Was something really out there? Drop a comment and let me know your theory. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please subscribe. We got more Texas history coming every week. Everything from lost treasures to unsolved murders to creatures that may or may not be lurking in the woods. But most importantly, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you taking your time to explore these stories with me. And I'll see you on the next one.